My guest today did a lot for Galesburg sports, but he's also quick to point out Galesburg did a lot for him too. A 1991 Galesburg High School graduate, Mikki Johnson is one of the most talented football players to ever play for the Silver Streaks. Coach Chris Stiles at Galesburg called Mikki one of the top 5 most talented player he's ever coached, and 3 of those played in the NFL. Mikki went on to play for the University of Illinois, earning letters from 1993 to 95 as a defensive end and nose tackle, and he was honorable mention All Big Ten Conference in 1993. He graduated from the U of I with an undergraduate degree in sports management and a master's and doctoral degrees in human resource development. Dr. Mikki Johnson is a human resource leader with experience successfully managing large workforces across multi-site and state operations. He resides in the Chicagoland area with his wife, Mari, and his daughter, Remy. Mikki, thank you for joining me on WGIL.
Man, thanks for having me, Jay.
You're welcome. Looking forward to this one. So, as we talked about a little bit when we were pre-interviewing, you obviously had the skills to be a great football player, but you've said without hometown support of some key coaches, mentors, families who kind of took an interest in you growing up in Galesburg, that you might have gotten lost in the shuffle. Kind of talk about that a little bit.
Man, it's hard to talk about without getting emotional, but yeah, Jay, I come from a very humble circumstance. There was a lot of addiction issues in my home. We moved all over Galesburg quite a bit. It's always interesting because there's this story about the football piece and the athletic piece, and then there's the domestic piece that a lot of people in Galesburg really know nothing about.
Mm-hmm.
But essentially, how I kind of got started in organized sports was I used to play with the big kids out in the lot, and Reverend Wardell Cato, which would be Jerry Cato Sr.'s dad, and Buddy Cato's grandfather, saw me playing one day and said, "Hey, man, would you like to play organized football?" And that really kind of started this relationship with him. He said, in order for you to play football, you got to come hang out with me on Sunday. Well, I didn't know he was a pastor. And so from there, it put me in places and spaces where great people really took care of me. When he passed unexpectedly, Rodney Bunch and Betty Bunch kind of filled that void. The Chad Danielson and Rick Danielson and Peggy Danielson, the whole Danielson family, like I literally lived with them almost every summer that we played baseball, travel ball, Legion ball. I literally lived in their home on Maple Avenue. And then you have Chris Stiles, who was brash enough and tough enough to give me this kind of tough love that I needed. But love on me in a way that I knew was endearing and developmental and loving. And there's a lot of things about being from Galesburg that I'm proud of, and that is certainly one of them. And I really missed having that in Champaign.
Yeah. We'll talk about Coach Stiles in a minute here, but let's talk about your Streaks football career. How would you compare yourself as a player from when you were a freshman or sophomore to when you were a senior? I mean, what was the growing part of it?
The growing part of it was, so I think that probably one of the biggest parts was, so when I was young, and from the time that I kind of got into organized sports, there really wasn't anything that I felt like I couldn't do. But a lot of what was transpiring at my house and in my home bled over into these different arenas, right? So when I was younger, I was kind of categorized as this kid with a bad attitude and, didn't listen. And, but a lot of that was the circumstance. And so as I got older, I had to recognize and realize that I had to compartmentalize a lot of that stuff, and that the developmental process that I needed to be where I wanted to be and where I wanted to go and to have the kind of opportunities that I wanted to have, like I had to leave that part of my life at home and come to school and get in the weight room and listen to coaches and participate. And I think the other part too was the academic part. Man, I wasn't the best student early on in my high school career. And when Coach Styles came, and the relationships that he had really began to shine a light on me. I was already getting some attention kind of in baseball, but the football piece like took off, which also made the baseball piece kind of take off, which was
Uh-huh.
interesting. But yeah, his level of commitment and attention to detail. I tell people all the time, man, like I walked into the University of Illinois and all of the things that I knew about football, um, from scheme to steps to everything that we did at Illinois, the verbiage was different, but Coach Styles had prepared me for all of that. Coach Styles, Coach Reed, I mean, all of that.
Okay. This is Jay Redfern. I'm talking to 1991 GHS grad Mikki Johnson. So you didn't have a lot of team success until your senior season, really. I think Galesburg was 3-6 in 88, 2-7 in 89, and then you guys were 6-3 in 1990. Could you sense the program growing even through a couple tough seasons?
Yes, definitely, man. Yeah, the Coach Styles brought a lot of change.
Mm-hmm.
He demanded a lot. Um, it was Coach Styles was a very kind of beat you up, love you up kind of a dude, man.
Uh-huh.
Um, and so he demanded a lot. He commanded a lot from like JFL coaches. He wanted them running his programs and things to create this systematic process for GHS being where GHS grew during his tenure. But yeah, the like we really didn't have a weight room program. We didn't have a summer program. We didn't have a real camp system. I mean, in camp, like a summer football camp,
Mm-hmm.
we had two-a-days, right, which led into the season.
Yeah.
Coach Styles came in and installed a whole camp process. Like, yo, you want to play in the fall, you need to be at you need to be at camp. And so, but there was a lot of things. I watched his interview and he talked about Mr. Lindstrom and all the people that he would beg for help and I remember he used to have stacks and stacks of like McDonald's free meals and Wendy's meals and all these places that he would go and that was just the brilliance of who he was, right? Like I mean, he really held us to a particular standard, but then he also loved on us in a way that was incredibly endearing.
How did that go over with the players? I mean, you obviously, accepted that and embraced it. Was it kind of a tough transition with Coach Styles and that attitude coming in?
Definitely.
It was. Okay.
I mean, we had some kids. I mean, man, we had one kid that I'm thinking of in particular, whose name I won't mention, um, incredibly skilled, remarkably skilled. I think he was starting offensively. I think he was one of the only kids that we had that was all conference. He was honorable mention all state. And, Coach Styles walked into the program and was like, yo, these are the things that I'm going to expect of you on and off the field. And he didn't remain with the program. Probably the most talented player that we had, in the program itself. And so that was kind of a aha moment in terms of you need to get your stuff in order. You need to get your house in order, right?
Yeah.
Or you
Yeah.
won't be here long.
Yeah. You kind of, I mean, you've talked about this already a lot, but what did he mean for your career? I mean, what did he do? You kind of mentioned some of the behind the scenes stuff, but what did he do for you?
Um, Man, there's so many things. I think probably there's a couple of things I think that stick out. One, he never judged me. My situation was my situation was hectic. I think in the 17 years that I was in Galesburg, from K through 12, I lived in 60 different places. in a little bitty town like that, right?
Mhm.
So we were very transient. It was really, there was a lot of chaos, and he never judged. But he did pour into me, and in ways that, and I'll tell you a story, in ways that, like, he and his wife both, when they moved there, um, they didn't have any children, and so
Right.
I was kind of like, I was kind of like their child. But he poured into me, man, and he believed in me in ways that I hadn't, I mean, like, I knew I was good for Galesburg, but I didn't know that I was globally good. You know what I mean? I mean, I
Mhm.
had been nowhere, man. I mean, the only places that I had been was, the Quad Cities to play ball, and really kind of Peoria to play ball. And then, if you recall, in the spring in baseball, we would take a
Yeah.
trip to Missouri. But
Mhm.
I had been to Chicago. I hadn't really been to other I hadn't, I just hadn't been anywhere. Um, and so he believed in me in ways that were really, really remarkable. And then, what came with Coach Styles was he had played at Oak State. He had just left the job with Lou Holtz. So he had a lot of currency for us in a
Yeah.
way that, we didn't recognize. So I'll tell you, my junior year, I had taken the ACT. Man, I'll never forget this. We were right next to Mr. Hellenthal's office, which, the weight room was right just adjacent to his
Yeah.
office. And it was just he and I in there. And he was asking me, like, hey, did you get the results of your ACT? I said, yeah, but I haven't looked at them yet. I was too scared to look at them. So I handed them to him. And man, this dude started bawling. I mean, like, I'm sorry,
Yeah.
like, sobbing, weeping.
Yeah.
And, I had made the mark. I scored a 22 or 23 on the ACT. And so that meant that for me, like, all doors are open.
Yeah.
Um, that that's the dude, like, when I watched your interview, that, the meals he bought for me, the cleats that he bought for me, the nights I slept on his couch, man, there were times where, um, I like, we were in flux and we were essentially homeless.
Mhm.
And he would give me his car. I mean, my family, we didn't even have a car.
Yeah.
He would give me his vehicle to, like, yeah, here, drive, go get something to eat, go get your,
Yeah.
just, man,
Yeah.
the things that he did are just really insurmountable.
Yeah. And
I
those are the
know
kind
that
of things that most people don't know, obviously. So,
yeah, yeah, and the thing is, right, that, like, he ne we ne he just did it because he did it,
mhm.
uh, naturally, I learned growing up that, like, the things that happen at home kind of stay at home, and so I tried to keep it that way, because I knew that it was difficult for people to understand, right? Like,
Right.
all the things that you just said about me in the opening, like, I was, the Big Six Player of the Year and this and that, and, I didn't even have a phone at home. I mean, coaches had to call me at school, or they would call me at Northgate when we went over there for PE, right?
Mhm.
And so there were just all these things that were happening with me that I knew wasn't necessarily normal, but I mean, it was my livelihood. You know what I mean?
Yeah.
And so Coach Styles didn't judge based on any of that, but he did know that my circumstance was unique, and he made sure that he poured into me in a way that was unique as well.
Yeah. Well, that's great to hear that side. Cause like you said, I don't think a lot of people knew that side. So,
Yeah, yeah,
he deserves that praise.
yeah. He got me tearing up over here on your show.
Okay. Well, we'll move on a little bit here. So, you made the Chicago Sun-Times All-State team in 1990. So, what was the recruiting process like for you? When did it start? Who were the finalists, and how did you end up at Illinois?
Oh man, it started my sophomore year. Yeah, it started my sophomore year. I started garnering a bunch of attention. And, you know, I think out of the gate, I mean, I knew Coach Styles was there, and I knew Coach Styles had a bunch of relationships. So I didn't really buy into the fact that it was me per se,
Yeah.
right? I
Yeah.
thought it was more him. I just, you know, so so that was probably a very, very good thing for me because it allowed me to just focus on, you know, playing ball as opposed to all the things that were happening.
Hmm.
Um, you know, my circumstance was unique as well. As I mentioned, like a lot of my recruiting interaction and engagement um, happened at GHS because I didn't have the means to have, you know.
Yeah.
So that candidly actually hurt a lot of my recruiting relationships because people felt like they couldn't get a hold of me. Um, so yeah, man, a bunch of schools from the SEC, everything probably in the Midwest, from Missouri to Louisville to Purdue, pretty much all the Big Ten schools. Um, and so how I ended up at Illinois. So I kind of thought I was gonna play. Augie Garrido was the baseball coach there at the time, and so I
Yeah.
thought I was gonna, you know, I thought I was gonna be this two-sport player,
Uh-huh.
and then he left my freshman year and went to Cal State Fullerton and won a bunch out there, and then on to Texas. But I thought that was kind of going to be the plan, and so I was really kind of picking schools that were looking at me for both sports. That's really what, you know. I mean, my eyes were, you know, this
Yeah.
big. I didn't have any understanding of what I was walking into at Illinois, and the
I mean,
demand.
at that point, was baseball still a possibility for you? I
Yeah,
mean,
it was. I think that I was probably garnering more attention in football. So you know, there some of the schools that came after me pretty early on the baseball side were like, well, you know, he's probably going to go to the football route.
yeah.
Some of those had fallen off too. Um, but yeah, so I think my final visits were Louisville, Missouri, Oklahoma, um, Illinois. I don't know if I recall the other one, but I took a bunch of unofficials too. Like I went to Georgia Tech, um, the, and went to a bunch of camps like the summer before my senior year. So yeah, I mean, it was a lot of people, and it was a lot of, you know, I didn't have a lot of balance, so I was very thankful for Coach Styles being there in that process because,
Hmm.
I mean, he knew what it was, you know what I
Yeah.
mean? So I
Yeah.
had somebody that I could lean on at the time.
Yeah. I was talking to Coach Styles leading up to our interview a little bit, and he said he'll never forget talking to Coach John Makovic on the phone and learning that he was going to offer you a scholarship. He said it was one of the proudest days in his coaching career. So,
Wow, that's
yeah.
yeah. Coach
Yeah.
Deal was the offensive line coach, man, and that's who had recruited me. But that's awesome to hear. You know, it's interesting because there's all these stories and experiences and things that, like, just listening to your interview with him that I didn't know, you
Hmm.
know. Uh,
It is cool to catch up after, what, 20, 30 years just to,
yeah,
to hear the backstories of how everything happened.
yeah, and you know, I mean, you know, Jay, at that time, he was like, I mean, he was like my pops, you know,
Hmm.
and so he was very he was he was really demanding of me, particularly as you know, him wanting me to lead the team and lead my teammates and that sort of thing. But he was also guarded. And so there was some things that, you know, might have happened in the school or would happen in the community that he didn't think that I was mature enough to handle. And so he guarded them from me,
Yeah.
you know, which at 17 and knowing all the things that he knew, like he personally knew about my circumstance, uh, as a grown man with children, like I really respect that, you know?
Yeah.
And yeah, yeah, I really do. I really respect that. And I know that he did it because he cared about my well-being, you know?
Yeah. This is Jay Redfern. I'm talking to 1991 GHS grad Mikki Johnson, the former Silver Streaks and Fighting Illini football star and a member of the Galesburg Athletic Hall of Fame. Talk about the transition from high school to major college football, both on and off the field. How difficult is that?
Football wise, I felt like I came from a really, really good program with a lot of support. The amount of time that goes into football is there's no way to prepare yourself for that.
Yeah.
I remember like my third day at that time, rookies had a whole week of rookie camp. And I remember it was midnight and we were in a unit meeting. It was just the defensive unit meeting. And I remember questioning like all these things that I knew about football that I love. Like, I don't know that I love it as much as these people do. This is nuts. You know what I mean? I mean, camp is 6 a.m. to midnight every day, you know? And then you got 2 weeks when the vets come in. So the amount of time, the amount of preparation and like mental reps, like Coach Stiles did a really good job of introducing film review and film study. So there were a lot of things that I didn't know at the time, but I walked right in and, you know, once I got used to the system, the football part wasn't really tough. The school part, like balancing school and trying to have some semblance of a social life while playing football was remarkably, it was very difficult.
Yeah, I'm sure it was.
Yeah.
So did you ever doubt that you belonged, and when did you finally know that you were a legit Division I football player?
No, man. I never doubted that I belonged. I will tell you this. So here's a funny story. I had this kid. So we show up for football camp, and you know back then there's no like real video to watch on other people. There is no internet. There was no 4-star recruit, 5-star recruit. It was like, you know, you're all conference, all American, all state, and your name shows up on a list somewhere with some other kids you don't know, you know?
Yeah, right.
But there were a couple of names in my recruiting class that I had seen everywhere. And one of them was this kid named John Horn. John Horn was a Joliet Catholic grad. He was all everything. First team parade All-American, first team USA Today All-American. I mean, he was all everything. So I walk in to my dorm room, and there's these two little people, and then there's this kid that's like 6'8". I was like, yo, who are you? And he was like, hey, I'm John Horn. Now, John Horn was the national powerlifting champion from his sophomore, junior, senior year of high school, right? And I'm like, what in the hell did I just, what did I just get myself into? And so like that, there was doubt there, right? But like once we got onto the field, you know, and we had some kids that, you know, had bodies like Tarzan and played like Jane, you know what I mean? And so the equilibrium is let's get out between these lines and, you know, and play. And so when that happened, any doubt that I might have had or reservation that I might have had to be able to do what I needed to do went away.
Yeah, and that's kind of ironic you mentioned Joliet Catholic because the next year Galesburg plays Joliet Catholic in the playoffs with Mike Allstott. So was he still around that next year? Did you guys kind of talk about that game?
Yeah. So Mikey went to Purdue, and we thought we were going to get him. And then there were several kids that came off of that team that I played with. You know what I mean? So yeah, we talked about it a lot, and you know, it's always interesting because like where kids come from, like we're all teammates, but where kids come from, whether it's the public league or whether it's the Catholic league or whether it's Chicagoland or downstate, like, oh, you know, or whether it's
Yeah.
the with the burbs, like it's, you know, there's this like, everybody knows where everybody's from. And so, you know, we keep up with each other in that way.
Yeah. So you had a lot of big moments with the Illini, but maybe the none bigger and on a bigger stage than that 1993 game against Michigan, 108,000 people in Ann Arbor. Tell me about that game and how you played that game.
Man, that was such a great year. Because so you know, I kind of went into my true freshman year going to be a rush linebacker, which is a defensive end essentially.
Mm-hmm.
And I ended up tearing my shoulder up. So I had 3 shoulder surgeries in like 9 months. And so that fall, in walks Simeon Rice. I'm not playing, so they need to put somebody right at
Yeah.
defensive end. And here walks this superstar freak of an athlete.
Uh-huh.
And so naturally they put him in that position because I was down. And then so I had to figure out what I was going to do and where I was going to, you know, I had to move somewhere because they
Yeah.
just burned his red shirt, right?
Yeah.
So I had to get on the field. And so I ended up moving to nose guard. And it was, you know, it was a really, that year was such a humbling experience because this was my first real year at getting an opportunity to play without being hurt, you know?
Mm-hmm.
And I was playing really well. I didn't know how well I was playing really, because they wasn't sure what they had with me because I'd spent a year and a half on the shelf, you know.
Mm-hmm.
And so the Michigan game was, I had some good games. I had about 10 tackles and 2 TFLs and a fumble recovery against Purdue like the week before. I played really, really well against Arizona, which they had Desert Swarm and Teddy Bruschi just a couple weeks prior to that. And then the Michigan game happened, man, and I kind of played out of my brain. At the time, it was the largest, I think it was the largest football game in terms of attendance
Mm-hmm.
in history. It was a primetime game on ABC. And yeah, man, we took it to them. So it was a lot of fun.
Yeah. So that season, you know, you did lead the Illini in tackles for loss, and you were playing in a pretty good defense with Simeon Rice. So
Yeah,
yeah,
Simeon Rice and Kevin Hardy was my roommate.
yeah,
Kevin was the number 2 pick that year, and Sim was the number 3 pick.
yeah.
Yeah.
So you know, after your senior season, were you disappointed that you weren't drafted? Did you expect to be drafted?
Yeah. Yes. Yeah. Yeah. The end of my career was challenging. Um, it was challenging. I stayed away from injury my whole sophomore year. I got banged up a little bit my junior year with a knee thing. Um, I got rolled up on in the Wisconsin game at the end of my sophomore year, and my ankle was never really the same after that. And um, yeah, there was personality differences too, you know,
Mm-hmm.
as I got older, with the coaching staff. And, you know, we were my class was the last Makovic class. And, you know, when you have a new coach come in, you know,
Yeah,
the new coach wants the young kids.
yeah.
He wants to be able to run his system with his kids. And so yeah, I was disappointed. I had a few opportunities to, you know, kind of go to camp and things like that. For different reasons they didn't pan out. I mean, one of the things is, you know, it's hard to take a kid, you know, back then, if you had one surgery, you know, that was a big deal if somebody took a chance on you in the draft. And I
Yeah.
had 3, you know,
Yeah.
in 9-month span. So yeah, it was painful because football is the only thing, you know, I mean, it's always what I wanted to do.
Mm-hmm.
And so to have somebody tell you you're not good enough is, you know,
Yeah.
that's hard to allow to resonate, you
Yeah.
know? Yeah.
This is Jay Redfern. I'm talking to 1991 GHS grad Mikki Johnson, the former Silver Streaks and Fighting Illini football star. How closely do you still follow Illini football? I mean, are the 4-0 Illini for real?
We're gonna yes, they're for real
Okay.
because you can't be 4-0 in the Big Ten and not be for real.
Yeah.
So they're for real. I think maybe the more appropriate question is we're going to find out how real this weekend, right? And that doesn't mean that they need to go to Penn State and win the game. They need to go to Penn State and compete.
Yeah.
Right? I mean, Penn State's in the top 10 every year for a reason. I've played there. That's a hell of a place to try to go and snuff out a win. Their crowds are raucous. Pennsylvania is a huge, huge football state. So yeah, I mean, it looks like football again.
Yeah.
That's healthy, you know. I loved Lovey. I mean, everything that he brought to that program, tons of talent. But it just didn't look like football all the time, you know. So I don't particularly have a relationship with Bielema, but I hear good things. So.
Okay. So in May, and we're going to get off football a little bit here. In May, you were invited to speak at Knox College, addressing some young students receiving scholarships for the support group for African American affairs. What was your message to them?
Man, my message was that I'm a Galesburg kid, and when you hear my name at home, when you hear my name in Galesburg, there's a lot that comes with it. And a lot of people will say the same thing that like Coach Stiles said, right? Which is, this is one of the best athletes that I've ever coached.
Yeah.
But that's just part of the story,
Right.
right? Part of my story is I had a very tumultuous home situation. Part of my story is that I overcame that. Part of my story is I did play in front of 108,000. And I did do all these things, and I was All-State and Conference Player of the Year and all that stuff. But I also have a PhD, and I also have adopted children and been a foster parent and coached AAU. You know what I mean?
Yeah.
Like the point is that I wanted them to understand that sometimes in Galesburg, especially now, right, with a lot of the commerce gone, like it was there when I was coming up, and schools closing and hospitals closing, like you can develop a very, very narrow mindset, right? And being in this little bitty town and not having seen anything. And so I just wanted them to know that there's an opportunity for them to make it. And I had 7 things that I talked to them about, like 7 suggestions for them to be successful in college. So it was cool. It was like it was in front of a bunch of people, but we just sat down and we had a good old Galesburg conversation.
Yeah, well, that's really cool. So before we wrap up with our rapid fire round, tell me a little bit of what you've been doing since you left the U of I. You've had a really successful career in human resources.
Yeah, it's been cool, man. There's a lot of things about being in HR that there's a lot of connectivity to sports and teamwork and effort and energy and care and empathy about people. And so those are some of the things that I've tried to build. I worked at U of I in HR for about 12, 13 years. And then I've worked in the private sector. I've done some consulting. During that time, I got my master's degree and a PhD in human resources. And so, yeah, it's been a really successful career. I tell people all the time that my job is to love on people that love people, right?
Yeah.
And
Yeah.
so that's kind of what I bring to the space.
Okay, so let's finish with our rapid fire round. I'm going to say something. You give me your first thought. So, how about Silver Streaks sports hero growing up?
Silver Streak sports hero, Bobby Jackson.
Yeah, I read that before you said that. You can't
Yeah.
pick somebody better. I mean, Galesburg had you saw them all. You were pretty young, but I mean, they had such a string of great running backs. Yeah, I mean,
and so here's what's crazy. Like me and Bobby grew up in the neighborhood, right? So I was a big kid, but I was young, right? I was super young. But when I mentioned to you earlier that Reverend Cato would come get me in the lots where I was playing with the boys, like that's who I was playing with. And so I watched him just be a terror, man. And he was such a good, humble dude. I always loved that about him. Like his level of humility was for as much as much media attention and as many people pulling on him. I just admired how he handled all that. You know, it was just
Yeah.
like another Tuesday.
Yeah.
Bobby.
Yeah. How about was there an unsung hero or underrated teammate during your Galesburg playing career?
You know, I'll tell you. We're talking about football. Well,
Yeah.
it could be football or
Either
baseball.
one. Yeah. Either one.
Yeah, because you know, back then all the good athletes had to play everything.
Yeah.
You know, I there was a dude who I had a lot in common with. We had very different home circumstances, which I think kind of got in the way of our relationship a little bit. But in terms of, man, when I hit the field with him, uh, never had a doubt. Chris Parrish.
Okay.
Chris Parrish was our catcher. We grew up competing against one another in JFL, and then when we got to the high school, KP was just he was everything that you would want in a teammate in terms of like who you want on the field with you.
Okay. How
Yeah.
about catching a pass or making a tackle for loss? Which was a better feeling?
I think you have to work harder to get the TFL, man. So I'll
Yeah.
take the TFL.
Okay.
Yeah.
How about the best thing about playing Division I sports?
Growth and development.
Okay.
Personal growth and development.
How about the worst thing about playing Division I sports?
Attention.
Okay. How about we talked about coaches. How about most inspirational teacher or teachers when you were going through Galesburg schools?
Oh man. Two that come to mind. Jim Jacobs was my fifth grade teacher. I literally just had a conversation about him the other day. And Mrs. Coleman was my second grade teacher at Cook Elementary School.
Okay. It's amazing how the elementary teachers, that's the same for me, that they can have, some of the biggest impacts on your life and memories.
And you know, at a young age, man, that was when I didn't understand, you know, all the things that were kind of happening were just beginning to start happening at home. And you know, I was responsible for a lot. And yeah, their care and endearing nature was it helped a lot.
Okay. How about favorite all-time Galesburg restaurant?
Mm. Uh Man, that's an easy one. What's the hot dog spot downtown?
Coney Island.
Man, easy.
Two
All
weeks in
day.
a row. Kurt Bell said that last week.
Oh
So
man,
yeah.
all day.
Yeah.
I have a funny story. I have a funny story about that. So you know, my wife's from Chicagoland. I take her there. Like, hey, you get these hot dogs. I've raved about them. I mean, you know, if you're from there, you've eaten these hot dogs, man,
Yeah.
since you were
Right.
5, right?
Yeah.
Best hot dogs, blah 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 blah. I take her there. You know, we go in. She's kind of looking at the decor. It's, you know, little. You know, it's a little rural,
Yeah.
a little. You know, uh, um, and a little drugstore-ish, you know. And so we eat the hot dogs, man, and we leave. And I'm so excited to hear how well she enjoyed them. And she's like, hey, you know, I was like, yo, we need to get a divorce. Like, what's wrong with you? These things are phenomenal, right? Though that's actually every time I come to Galesburg, that's what me and Mr. B do.
Okay.
We get hot dogs and crack a beer. I mean, that's our normal routine.
That's cool. That's a great place. So finally, Galesburg. What does Galesburg mean to you?
Man, I'm gonna give you an answer, but it's probably 100 times this amount. There are so many wonderful people there. There's so many people that are part of my story, from the Shays to the Danielsons to the Catos to the Bunches there's just so many people, man, that made sure that I had money in my pocket, that that I was loved on, that I was cared for. Um, you know, there were people that knew that my situation was challenging, without fully knowing all of the details of how challenging it was.
Hmm.
And man, they just poured into me. So whether it was a hot meal or words of encouragement, or there's no way, uh, there's no way a young kid in the circumstance that I was in should be in the position that I am in currently.
Yeah.
And I owe all of that to all of those good people.
Okay, that wraps up my conversation with former Galesburg and Fighting Illini standout and so much more, Dr. Mikki Johnson. Mikki, you're one of the best Streaks athletes I've ever had the pleasure of covering, and it's really cool because I didn't know that backstory about you, so it's great learning about some of the things you had to overcome, and I really admire that you have such an appreciation for Galesburg and its people. So it was great catching up, and thank you for joining me on WGIL.
Anytime, Jay. Thank you for having me. I sincerely appreciate it.